Today, we're talking about funding the future with insights from the state of Black nonprofits. Um, I am Yvonne Sims, Educational Program Manager for Candid based in Atlanta. If you don't know Candid already, then you should know that we are the coming together of two organizations, the Foundation Center and GuideStar, and we are now Candid. So every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. Through research, collaboration, and training, Candid connects people who want to change the world to the resources they need to do it. We do that through trainings. We do it through webinars like the one we're having today, highlighting the good work of other organizations. Particularly on the Equitable Access team, which is a part of Candid, we want to highlight equitable work, and we want to make sure that the philanthropic sector is starting to look like what we would prefer it to look like, and that everyone has the same opportunities. So we're really excited to have these special topic webinars that highlight really good work from great nonprofits. All right, excited for Heather Infantry today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to read her bio while she takes over. So I can tell you Heather Infantry is the CEO for Giving Gap, a national organization advancing racial equity in giving for high-performing Black-founded nonprofits. She is also the founder of the Atlanta Task Force for Philanthropic Reparations. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Created in response to her public call out for the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta's exclusion of Black arts organizations and COVID relief fund. Okay, I'm sorry. In which the task force advocated for an unprecedented, and see, I didn't know that because I know about this unprecedented contribution of $1.4 million to 33 Black organizations. Okay, I only saw that part. They didn't tell me about your part. Prior to the position, Heather served as the managing director for the Transformation Alliance, a collective advancing equitable transit-oriented development as a pathway to Black prosperity. She was also the founding executive director of Generators, a retro futurist social house. We have so many questions for Heather on Atlanta's Beltline, whose mission it is to bring people together to generate ideas that shape the future of cities. Throughout her career, Heather has fostered an ongoing curiosity for people, places, and ideas at the intersection of culture and equity. Heather holds a BA in theater, that makes sense, from Georgia State University and an MBA in nonprofit management from Trinity University. So everyone welcome with all the love. Yeah, there you go, all those emojis. Heather Infantry. And I'll
Thank you,
pass it over to.
Yvonne.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for the introduction, for the opportunity to share a little bit about my work and this exciting report that we put together earlier this year, and to the whole Candid team. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry to not see your faces, but I am feeling the love in the chat, so thank you for that. I want to preface before I start one important thing. If it's not obvious to all of you watching right now, I am a Black woman. I identify as a Black woman. I center my experiences as a Black woman. It's the lens on which I understand and see my world. And it is the lens by which I can speak the most authentically. That's not to say it's not without its blind spots. As someone who grew up in Toronto to Jamaican immigrant parents, who then at some point moved to the United States to live and work, there are certain things, particularly about the Black American experience, that I know from a distance, not experientially. I do have American children, so my identity and the way I see myself in the world has definitely been complicated, both by living here and by raising them here in Atlanta, Georgia, in the South. Those of you that are in the South know that that's an interesting experience all to itself. I also want to state that I, as a result of Blackness being the center of my identity, I shy away and do not subscribe to terms like BIPOC or POC. One, because I can't speak authentically to the experiences and plights of other people. Two, the term tends to generalize everybody into like one group as if our experiences are all the same. And then three, these are terms that continue to put our identity in proximity to whiteness, when in actuality, we need to put our identity in proximity to ourselves. And so as I go through this presentation, you'll find that I tend to, again, center around Blackness, either in groups that I'm referring to or putting myself in conversation with those that are like myself. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and have us begin. Can I just get a quick thumbs up that everyone, from somebody, that this is appearing for you, this montage of photographs?
You're
Okay,
good.
awesome. Y'all are quick on that. Y'all are quick on the thumbs up. Okay, so I was advised by Yvonne to provide a little bit of context for this conversation. So I wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about myself. So here in front of you is a montage of different things that represent me, Heather Infantry, as a woman, as a mother, as a nonprofit leader, as someone living in Atlanta. That picture of the gentleman on the horse was like a picture I just took randomly because there literally was a brother in the middle of the street on a horse. Anybody that lives in Atlanta knows how special of a place this is, where things like that just happen on the daily. Photographs of my high school experiences, being part of certain groups and clubs, and always dancing, always, always, always dancing. As Yvonne mentioned in the intro, I have an undergraduate degree in theater, had all aspiration and interest of being a performer, and quickly shifted that dream and fell into the arts administration place, or space rather, where I found a sweet spot for myself in fundraising. Those of you who are charged with fundraising in your organizations know how incredibly performative fundraising is. It's a lot about storytelling. It's about creating that emotional through line to connect to donors and funders in order to get them to say yes to the missions that you are supporting. I also like the introverted side of fundraising, which is a lot about data and projections and dealing with numbers and trying to figure out how to close gaps. So I've been in the fundraising space for 20 plus years and have worked in arts organizations, health and human service organizations, and a couple of things in between. As a fundraiser, I've developed a certain philosophy around how I approach the work. It was working with one organization in particular here in Atlanta, where we were having probably one of our most successful fundraising years. We were kind of at the halfway mark of the fiscal year, and we were projecting that we were going to close the fiscal year in the black 6 months ahead of schedule. And we were anticipating like the unique opportunity to fundraise a year in advance, which is, for those of you in this space, that's kind of unheard of, right? To be able to do that, because so many of us are always like getting down to the wire. So just as we are starting to make projections into the new fiscal year, I get the call. I get the call from the long-term funder telling me that this would be the last year that they would support our organization because their priorities were shifting into another direction, and we no longer fit in their priority focus. And when I asked this funder if there was anything that we could do, if there was some sort of misstep that we made, they promptly replied back, no, absolutely, no, not at all. In fact, your organization has been exemplary. We often cite you as an example to our other grantees. This was particularly perplexing to me because I'm doing the best work that I can. I'm being told that it's good, it's quality, and yet and still not getting the money. So what do you do when you're working hard and you're doing great work and you don't get the result that you want? That was sort of a conundrum that I was faced with. And that's when I came across this interesting quote from a philosopher named Seneca that says, and I'm sure you've all heard this quote, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I had this aha moment that I was going to create a strategy based on luck, that we would do all these things within our organization to increase our luck. And a big part of that was preparation. A big part of that was how do we mind and tend to our relationships? How do we show up in different spaces, constantly being visible to those around you? How do we make favors and just engender goodwill amongst our partners, our donors, like everybody that we come in contact with the idea that if we keep planting these seeds of goodness, that in the moment that we needed help, there would be someone there to help us. And it was actually pretty effective. It was a donor who ended up moving to a new company who might have been asked by a colleague, hey, we've got some funding that we want to earmark for a nonprofit. Can you make a recommendation? And then they would think of us. It was all those different kinds of ways in which we kept in front of folks so that if and when, well, never if, when you need help, they were there to help. And so I changed my title from development director to director of opportunity, and opportunity and luck became the basis of how I would fundraise and encourage my team to fundraise. Now, as a Black woman, that is not without its challenges. Clearly, there are challenges that go along with being a Black person in this space. I'm showing you here a picture of my hair at a time when I was working with a nonprofit organization and we were doing a capital campaign. Now, as part of the capital campaign, we would host a myriad of site visits, entertaining donors and funders to come through a facility that we had in Old Fourth Ward with the idea of pitching them on this big campus headquarter project that we were fundraising for. And on this particular occasion, well, as customary, when we're doing a site visit, this was something that I always organized and put together. And it was always my practice to set up the room, to give everybody their script on the team. And during the course of the site visit, I always like to be the person on the sidelines, just really observing how donors come into a space, looking at their body language, trying to see if what we're saying is resonating with them. I'm listening for what my colleagues are saying. Did they hit all the talking points? Is this where I need to interject and like remind a donor or funder of something, right? So I usually like to play on the sidelines. So we were entertaining this particular funder, a non-Black person up in years living in the north side of Atlanta. So that tells you something about who they are. And apparently before coming to the visit, had done some research by looking at our website and came across my picture where my caused them to be reluctant about coming to the. And the reason why I know this information is because my boss, a non-Black woman who founded the organization, contacted me with all this excitement, right? She contacted me with all this excitement saying that this donor, oh, I see that someone said that it froze. Did it freeze? Are we
Yeah,
good?
Heather, you've frozen, at least your picture has. So maybe you just want to turn off video for now, and that way we can
Okay.
make sure we keep hearing you.
Yes,
Okay.
we'll do that. Okay. Someone said we missed some of what you said. Heather, can you go back a little bit? Do you know, Yvonne, like what part that I should start at?
You were talking about, taking a meeting and playing the
Yes.
sidelines, but they had done their research and saw your picture. So maybe
Yes,
start from
they
there.
saw my hair. So start from the beginning of my hair. Okay. They saw my hair on the website. They were displeased by my hair, what they saw, and were reluctant about coming to the site visit. And the reason why I know this information is because my boss, who's a non-Black woman who founded the organization, informed me that this donor was going to contribute to the campaign. But he informed her that when he was preparing to come, he had seen my picture on the website, was kind of taken aback by my hair. It made him reluctant to want to participate. But then when he came to the meeting and got a chance to meet me and hear me speak, he was taken aback and so captivated that it inspired him to make a contribution to the campaign. And my boss, again, a non-Black woman, thought that this was like a win for race relations in America and was just so giddy and excited and was telling everybody about what had happened. And I was incredibly humiliated by the whole experience and told my boss that it's 2018. We live in Atlanta. Uh, I don't think we should accept his money. I think we should recommend that he spend his money on analyzing why he has these antiquated ideas about a woman whose hair looks like this, right? And obviously, that's not what happened. They took the money, but these are some of the experiences, along with others, that I've had along the way as a Black woman fundraising in largely white spaces here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm sure many of you have experiences that are not too far off or may have been even worse. The shift for equity, though, for me came about, as Yvonne had mentioned, around this issue with the community foundation that happened just before the pandemic. And to set the stage a little bit, I've always had a foothold in the arts and culture community, not only because I got my degree in theater, but just the arts have always resonated with me in a particular kind of way. And for those of you that don't know, Georgia has always ranked between 49th and 50th place for being one of the least supportive funding ecosystems for the arts and culture community. So I've always, in some sort of volunteer capacity, been involved in advocacy issues to address the gap in funding. And it was sometime before, at the start of the pandemic, that we were having these roundtable conversations that I started to notice that the faces around me were predominantly non-Black, and that the solutions that we were coming up with, when I thought about how it might resonate with my colleagues and peers, that it had no practical application, and that we really needed to have this conversation from an affinity space. And just as I'm having that thought, just as I'm saying that out loud, the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta announces a round of funding in response to COVID-19 for arts organizations. They give over $500,000 to 11 arts groups. And when I look at the posting, I notice right away that not a single Black arts organization has been awarded money. Not a single organization. Now, mind you, and you can see the post that I put on Instagram in the far left there, that was what I put on there. And this was at a point in the pandemic where we were acutely aware of the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 was having on our lives specifically. This is before Amy Cooper did what she did, and this was just before Officer Derek Chauvin maliciously murdered a human being in front of a convenience store in Minnesota. But it's in Atlanta, the place that has been coined the Black Mecca since forever, the place where we've had political Black leadership since the late 70s. This is the place that is home to Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta University, and Morris Brown. This is the birthplace of Martin Luther King and the cradle of the civil rights movement. And during a pandemic, disproportionately taking us out, a whole institution completely excluded us in a discipline that no one can dispute that we do. Like, if there's something that we are known for, it's arts, it's culture. We can say we own that. And so I took to social media, made a flippant comment, and that resulted in a bit of a viral moment with folks just chiming in about their experiences. And a colleague of mine, a very dear colleague of mine, non-Black gentleman who used to work with the Community Foundation, went behind the scenes and started to dig up data. He dug up data looking at the 27-year history of arts giving by the Community Foundation, and found that not just during COVID, but over the 27-year arc, there were many years where they gave us nothing. And more importantly, over the total history of the fund, 87%, well, more so 90% of funding had gone to non-Black arts organizations. 90% in a city like Atlanta. It should also be noted as part of this that they had Black program staff, and they had 5 Black people on their board. So the question of representation wasn't the issue, but representation without a value or eye towards equity certainly is. And so that ensued an entire advocacy campaign, but was also the seed for me finding a personal mission in wanting to address equity on a larger scale. And that's how I found Giving Gap. I was going to try and come back on camera to see if
We
that would
can
still
see
be okay.
you. We can see you and hear you. I'll let you know. Okay.
Okay, cool, great. So Giving Gap. So Giving Gap was founded in 2020 by Christina Lewis. I had photographs here on this slide of our other 2 founders, but for whatever reason, I had a technical issue. But it originally started with Christina Lewis while she was sheltering in place in New York City during the height of the pandemic. It should be noted that Christina is the daughter of Reginald Lewis, who was noted back in the 80s for being one of the richest Americans, and more specifically was the first Black person to build a billion-dollar company during that time. So, as influenced by her father, Christina has always been very involved with coming up with new ideas. She has started multiple nonprofits. She prides herself in being a philanthropreneur, having a leadership role in her family's foundation. So it's in true Christina form not to sit idle when things are falling apart around her. And it was during the pandemic that a lot of folks were being called to support our businesses. And so she was thinking about a complementary sort of call to action with nonprofits, supporting our nonprofits. And so she took to social media, posting a list of organizations that were near and dear to her and her family's foundation, and encouraged her colleagues, networks within her network and friends to support these organizations. And that sparked a bit of a viral moment when folks were contacting her about other recommendations that she might have in other places, other cities, around different cause areas. And that was her aha moment. What if we created this sort of clearinghouse of organizations where folks could easily find and support nonprofits serving our community? And that's what Giving Gap essentially is. With the pandemic, we definitely saw greater scrutiny of philanthropy, right? This intention of generosity being somewhat challenged by its own set of like systems that reinforce racism, that in no way has it been exempt, particularly when we think about how philanthropy has generated its wealth to begin with. And that in some ways, philanthropy has been set up and organized in such a way that reinforces a lot of the inequities that we have created organizations to address. In a lot of ways, philanthropy, as it is organized and institutionalized in the US, is really a tax-saving strategy that benefits the well-to-do. But philanthropy at its heart is really about like how we love up on each other. And the way that it's organized currently has created a lot of distance in that notion of caring and loving for each other. And so part of what we're trying to do at Giving Gap is getting back to that. I think it should also be noted in what we're discovering in the work that we do as we do more research is that, simply put, philanthropy, again, the way that it's organized and set up is not to accommodate the way that we do our work in our communities. It's not set up for our success. And those of us that are able to get grants through these various organizations or get top dollars from donors are really the exception and not the rule. And it is those exceptions that create a way for, the philanthropic ecosystem to hide behind policies that in a lot of ways disqualify us from being able to participate. The other aspect of philanthropy is that there's just no consequence for doing it poorly, right? You can give money or not give money, and there's there's no repercussion for that, right? We have absolutely no say in the ways that private dollars are directed. And so again, it makes engaging these relationships that much more difficult, and the power imbalance that much more greater. So Giving Gap essentially exists to close the gap in charitable giving for organizations like the ones that you are leading. And we do that through the directory, as I mentioned, but also by collecting data on your organizations and then organizing campaigns and events to increase and mobilize giving. The criteria for being on the platform is really simple. You must be an organization that was founded by a person of African descent. Your organization must be based in the USA, even though your work can be international. It must be registered here in the US. You must be a 501c3 or fiscally sponsored by a 501c3 that's in good standing with the IRS. And then lastly, you've got to have links that work to a website and to a donation link, which is the most important part of it. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about this report that we published. So the State of Black Nonprofits report was something that we launched at the end of February of this year. And there were some very specific goals that we had in mind when we put this report together. One, we wanted to tell a story about our community that was much broader than just saying like philanthropy excludes us from funding. We wanted to talk about like all the ways in which we show up and do the work and single out the unique qualities and attributes that make us exceptional in the way that we deliver our missions. And in doing so, we wanted to affirm our leadership in these spaces because there is a huge disservice that's being done to the well-being and psyche of us on the front lines when we are ignored or denied or having to navigate these systems that have no concern or consideration for how we have to do the work, the obstacles that we're bumping up against and trying to deliver these really complex issues. We also wanted to reframe how we define a high-performing organization. You know, for a lot of us, high performance is based on things like budget size and how big your cash reserves are, and very little about impact in any kind of meaningful way. So we really wanted to challenge how high performance is defined, while of course also being awareness to the giving gap that exists for our organization specifically. We got to partner with Social Insights, which is an Atlanta-based woman-led firm that brings a liberatory, equitable practice to doing research and evaluation. And it was such a treat working with them and partnering with them to put this report. In terms of the methods that we used, we worked with 3 different data sets that we put together. One, the data that's collected through the intake process for those organizations that want to be on the platform. At the point that we did the report, we had about 1,200 organizations in the directory. So in addition to collecting mission statements and that sort of thing, we're also collecting information about budget size, gender identity of the founder or leader, information about social media and other kinds of data points that we do not share publicly through the organizational profile, but that we keep on file internally and do our own level of interpretation and analysis. In addition to that data set, we also conducted a survey with a subset of the folks on the platform asking for more qualitative data, which I'll get into with the report findings, to get some insight into the why and the how we're able to show up in the ways that we do. And then lastly, we partnered with Candid to look at 990 data that they collect and house on their platform to cross-reference other data points, again, around financials, things like income and expenses, things like investments, if they had any, cash reserves, that sort of thing. So gleaning data from the 990 also went into all the analysis interpretation for this report.
Heather, really quickly, I shared the link for the report, but someone asked the question, can we share your report via our website, social media, and blogs?
Absolutely.
You're like, please and thank you. Okay.
100%. If you want me to come talk about it, I'll do that too.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
So let's get into the findings. Let's dig into this data. So this slide really talks about the proximity, or rather the correlation between racial identity of the founder and the likelihood that it's also led and serving by Black folks. This is important. I think Giving Gap is probably one of the only organizations that focuses on the racial identity of the founder. As I mentioned previously, in order to be on our platform, you have to be founded by a person of African descent, or by if it's a group of folks, the majority of the folks have to be of African descent. And we stipulate that for a couple of reasons. One, who founded the organization is a permanent act. That's a one-time occurrence. It doesn't change, right? Who leads an organization and who an organization benefits may change. And with this increased conversation around DEI, we've seen a lot of diversity hires being made, but not necessarily cultural changes within the institution, right? In the small time that Harvard University had a Black woman as president, that does not make Harvard in any shape or form a Black institution, right? There's a lot of work that has to go into being an organization that is Black centered and serving and benefiting. So while it is an imperfect metric for identifying the racial identity of an organization, it is the metric that we use. And as I also mentioned, that there's a strong correlation between, who has founded the organization, and then that organization being also Black led and Black serving. This is not a data point that we started collecting at the onset of Giving Gap. So this is a place where we have some additional work to do to complete the data set. But even of the organizations that we surveyed for this report, 73, just over 73% of them, check for all three. And then on our platform itself, 76.5% are also all three. And that's I think that's an important point to make. The other key finding of our report, which will be of no surprise to anybody on this webinar, is that nearly 60% of the women on our platform are, or nearly 60% of those that are leading nonprofit organizations are Black women. Black women are always in service to community. They lead in advocacy for our communities. Black women are most committed when it comes to their own dollars, and there's a lot of research being done in the field about the unique attributes of women leadership in general, but Black women in specific. We are extremely collaborative in our approach to solving issues. We report higher levels of productivity. We have such a fierce commitment to fairness. And again, this compulsion towards advocacy uniquely distinguishes us in this field over and over and over again. Photographed here is Crystal Clark Chapman, who is the founder and executive director of Beautiful Spirited Woman, which is a mentoring program based in Memphis, Tennessee. They've been around since 2010, and she has been championing this work for that entire time, and doing it with very little support from federal and state dollars. It should also be noted, as referenced here on this slide, that while Black women continue to champion the needs of community, continue to be bigger givers financially in terms of compensation, they lag behind. Candid recently did a report on the state of diversity in the nonprofit sector, and pointed out that as organizations get bigger in budget, those organizations are oftentimes male and are oftentimes non-Black. So the disparity is a huge gap in that regard as well. Another key attribute and characteristic of our nonprofit leadership is that we lead from lived experience. 92% of the folks indicated that they have at some point in their life grappled with the issues that their organizations were created to address. And lived experience really speaks to the expertise of people who have had experience in an issue, and that these individuals often have firsthand knowledge that can provide valuable insight to inform decision-making, programming, and advocacy efforts. When an organization taps into lived experience, they have stronger identities, better audience engagement, and increased impact. And as a field, we're starting to see lived experience being recognized, particularly in the mental health sector. And there's a quote that I want to read for you. Research shows that lived experience-based work is emancipatory, values-driven, informed by, and springing from a commitment to social justice. In this context, leaders can both lead and act as peer support, leading to a stronger, non-paternalistic, and that's really important, experientially grounded and more equitable movement. And this is an area where we really want to encourage funders and donors to consider when they're evaluating the merit of an organization. Look at who's leading and what do they actually know about the issues at hand from a lived experience place. Like this is a crucial question that needs to be on every grant application going forward. In addition to that, before I move to this slide, I also just want to note that one of the things that we found too is that our organizations are just inherently more diverse, right? It is inherent that our leadership staff will always be representative of the communities that we serve. It's just an inherent part of our leadership, where other organizations need quotas driven by funders when completing applications. This is just something that we do within our organizations. It is how we lead. So this is the part of the report that I would love to spend a lot more time figuring out. This is the qualitative part, that we tried to get out with some of the questions that we posed in the survey, really asking this question of why do you do this? Like, why do you do this work, particularly in this day and age where we are so acutely aware of the challenges and obstacles, right, in our way of doing this work, where we are dealing with racism in our work, but also coming home and dealing with it in our personal lives and trying to navigate our children through it. We've had more organizations come on the platform created in the last 3 years than ever before, which speaks to this obligation, duty, compulsion to serve, even in the face of racism. And more importantly, we see this unrelenting commitment to community, even when it's detrimental to our own health and well-being. I was on a call recently with a colleague of mine who was sharing a story similar to the one that I had, where a funder who had been supporting them for some time had called last minute, a couple of months before the end of the fiscal year, to say that they were pulling out, and gave no explanation as to why. Just they were pulling out, that's all I can give you, despite the fact that they have been in partnership with this organization for some time. And so my colleague had to go about figuring out how to close the end of year. And it was such a stressful, unexpected experience that she started grinding her teeth at night. Grinding her teeth at night that caused her to decay a tooth, and found herself in the dentist's office where she was at the threat of losing a tooth. But as she's telling me this story, as she's recounting this experience that she had, she goes on to say, the work that we do is so important to the creatives that work with us. For a lot of the artists that we're working with, like, we're their only check. And so if all my teeth have to fall out so that we can meet our budget goals, then so be it. That's the attitude, that is the duty, that is the obligation that we show up with over and over and over again in service to community. And I don't think funders and donors understand that specific attribute about who we are when we're working on the front lines of solving the most pressing issues. That we will do this and that we have done it to the death. And so when you think about who your best bet is on, it clearly is us. It is us. We are exceptional in this space. And I think a lot of us don't understand that aspect of ourselves in doing this work. Even when I pose the question, even when I try to dig into this further, right? It's folks are so dismissive with me about it when I ask, like, why? You know, they'll say it's because I just have to, right? And there's a lot that we have to explore about, that we need to explore and really understand about what continues to keep us grounded and the service that we provide to the ideals of this country because of that commitment. I've said to folks before, I don't want to live in a world where we give up, where we become apathetic. I don't know what that world looks like. I don't think we've ever seen a world where we don't show up and care. This entire country is generated on the fuel and engine of our optimism and hope. And that needs to be recognized and rewarded. So I have this other slide. This will come as no surprise, just in terms of the ability for those of us to support ourselves in this service work that we're doing. A lot of us are having to take on other types of work in order to meet the needs that are required to support our livelihood and our overhead and that sort of thing. 77% of folks are working full time for the organizations, but more than half still needed to take on additional work to supplement their income. I've said a lot. I have some thoughts for donors and I have some thoughts for nonprofits, but this might be an interesting point before I segue into that to just take a few questions if there are any.
Let me see what I got here. Well, this is kind of a all money ain't good money question. So Elka says, Heather, what are your thoughts about reconciling the need to pursue operating dollars with the knowledge that often these are the very entities that participate in crushing Black communities?
That's a great question. And I think that's a bit of a moral dilemma that we have, but I do think we have choice. I think we have been beaten up in so many ways by the philanthropic ecosystem that we feel like we don't have choice, that we don't have the option to say no, and we definitely do. Not only do we have the option to say no, we also have the option to push back and say, well, why aren't you supporting me? Especially if we're looking at equity statements being written on organizational websites and not seeing dollars flow to us. This is the opportunity to reconcile the discrepancy between those two different ideas. This is also a time, like, I really don't think philanthropy, again, how as it's been organized, can really serve us in the ways that we need to. So what are the other ways that we can think about supporting and sustaining our work? And I have some thoughts about that in my closing slide as it relates to focusing on everyday givers, right? Getting back to the roots of how we support and love on each other in our community, right? Like, that's how the work's always been done. And it might mean that our work has to stay intimate. And I think that's fine. Like, scalability, growth, I have trepidation about those kinds of words because I don't know that always has people in the center of those kinds of like notions, right? Like, I don't know if we're the heart of that. I think it's just big for big sake. And there's something to be said about, doing the work at a level that allows it to be incredibly holistic and move at a pace and a scale that makes sense for you and your community.
Thank you. And I think along those lines, we had another question. Would love to hear your views when grants using language like BIPOC, minority, marginalized, and under-resourced when attempting to support projects in the Black community.
What are my thoughts about funders using that language, or we use it when we use that language?
I guess when the grants use that language, so the funders are using it. And I know we talk about this as we teach grant writing, that taxonomy and those words still exist, but I think personally that it's our responsibility to change that. But maybe you have a little more to say about that.
I mean, y'all know what my position is, as I prefaced in the beginning. I don't use those terms. I don't use it in service to the work that I do with Giving Gap, and I don't use it to refer to myself personally. I think the language is really dangerous, right? I don't use words like under. I don't use any adjectives when placed on our community and ourselves, right? I don't use the term under resourced or underfunded, because somehow the way that that reads out speaks as though there's some kind of incompetence on our part. It's not that we're underfunded or under resourced. It's that philanthropy has excluded us from funding, has denied us, has redlined us. All the words that you could use to describe what they have done, that's what they've done. Um, I'm very intentional about how I frame the problem as a problem of philanthropy and not a problem of the nonprofits. The nonprofits are doing what they need to do in service to their community. You are in the business of giving away money, and yet and still, how is it possible that the money doesn't get to the folks that need it most? How do we set up a whole institution whose business model is to give away money and the money doesn't get to us? There's something nefarious at play there. I'm very intentional about, distancing myself from terms like BIPOC and POC, because they're dangerous. If I think about the plight right now of just my Indigenous colleagues and peers, they're fighting to just be recognized as a visible group, right? My colleagues at Native Ways did a survey the other day where folks in America don't believe that Indigenous people exist. That is very different from what we are battling with in our communities. And that kind of nuance and sophistication needs to be, needs to be considered when we're talking about these issues and when we're thinking about how to support these various communities, right? It's really lazy on the part, I think, of funders and donors not to think about it in these more nuanced ways. I think challenge, to answer the question more directly, I think we challenge it, right? I think we need to inform the grant makers and ourselves about like what is acceptable and what's not, and wield the power of no to say that we will not play in the sandbox with you if it's not on these terms that will allow us to be most effective and impactful. At this point, what do you have to lose? They don't support us to begin with, right? So we might as well stand on our own and at least advocate for the things that we want and how we want them.
I love that.
Users.
Love that answer. And we've definitely been telling people you're proximate to the community and the needs. And so you teach the funder how to talk about what we know. And that's totally okay. And that'll kind of lead us to this question Damien asks. I wrote an article that was published in the Chronicles of Philanthropy around the topic of trauma funding. I was shot before.
Mhm.
That received a great amount of praise from those of us in this space, but really ticked off many in philanthropy. How would you navigate that?
Navigate ticking off philanthropy? Is that really the
Right.
question?
That I'm like, just keep doing it. No, I think the fact that it, yeah, navigate ticking off philanthropy.
Listen, trauma response giving is dangerous. It is so dangerous. I think about, I can't remember his name right now, but I think about the teenage boy who accidentally went to that white man's house. Was it in Kansas City, and was shot in the head because he was going to pick up his brother, and he ended up at the wrong house, and this man opened up the door and shot him in the head. And I remember the photograph of this teenage boy hooked up to machines, bandaged, around his head, hanging on by a thread. And within 24 hours, that GoFundMe raised $2.4 million within 24 hours. I don't know what the raise goal is at this point, but within 24 hours, he raised $2.4 million. What I remember about him is that he's a musician who had aspirations of going to college. If that same boy had come to us, had come to a funder and said, fund my trip to Africa, fund my, involvement in this arts program, we wouldn't respond to him in the same way. There's just this dangerous practice that we have of being compelled when we see Black life in the most devastating of circumstances. That's the only time that we can compel your interest or care in our lives. In our death, in our near death, never in our potential or opportunity. And that is not good for anybody. It's certainly not good for us. It's one of the reasons why I don't refer to what happened in 2020 as George Floyd. I always refer to it as what Officer Derek Chauvin did to an individual in front of a convenience store. Because the challenge is not with George Floyd dying. The challenge is that someone that we've entrusted with authority in protecting our communities could do the most heinous thing in front of bystanders on camera. And for a moment there be no repercussions. He's one of the few that actually have been charged and tried for acts like that, but a good number of them haven't been. And when we say remember their name, those are the names that we have to remember. The names of those faces who use their power to threaten and terrorize our communities. Those are the names that you never forget. Those are the faces you never forget, because that's where the real atrocity exists. Sadly, Black lives have been taken over and over again and will continue to be. We honor them in our community and in our families, but when we're telling the story of those bad deeds, we have to name who the criminals are, so we know where to direct our ire and to know where we need to find our safety.
Yes,
So
yes.
in short, yeah.
Yeah.
Keep fighting.
Right. Keep fighting the good fight. Don't kind of
Fighting.
lay down for that. We had some kind of technical questions about being a part of Giving Gap or
Yes.
the list. Someone says our nonprofit is Black led but not founded by an African American. What happens in that case?
Sadly, you're not on the platform.
Okay. And
It's it's
then
it's
you
it's an
already
imperfect metric,
answered.
y'all.
Yeah, I got you. And I know you said it's not a perfect metric, but you want to do something. And then are there any exceptions for Black women led and primarily Black employed agencies? So still not founded.
Currently, we do not make any exceptions around the founding piece of it. And again, that's imperfect. I know that we are leaving organizations out by having a criteria like that. I know we're also leaving organizations that are community based, that are not necessarily, organized with some sort of 501c3 affiliation or structure. But this is just where we've started. And as we continue to get feedback from the community, these things will shape and evolve how we uh, continue to build this directory.
Okay. I think I'll just do one more and then we can continue. What recommendations do you have for some orgs, ours being one, that live in intersections that people don't always understand? We struggle always having to explain to different funders that Black folks can be Latinx and vice versa, and it is tough for funders at times.
This is a great, oops, I'm going backwards. This is a great way to tee up sort of like my closing slide here with regards to recommendations to both donors and to nonprofits. But to that point, I think representing the breadth of our diversity, right? Black is very nuanced and complex, and really pointing to those distinctions when we're reporting our outcomes, right? I said when reporting outcoming, that should say outcomes, represent the breadth of our diversity when reporting outcomes. So again, it's another education factor, right? Um, there's also a way in which you can just assert that this is what it is and point out, why don't you know this, right? You can put the onus on them that there's a knowledge gap that you have and you need to do better research. But in terms of just as you're taking in, the data from the report and thinking about like, what do I do next? I'm running my nonprofit. I really don't have time for all the hoops and that sort of thing. If there's anything that you take away this one, that you are exceptional. Like you are absolutely exceptional. One, and that you heeded the call to do the work that you do, that you show up every day and doing it, and that you do it with love and you sacrifice, and that has to be acknowledged. You have to internalize just how exceptional you are in that regard. Like you have to breathe and live that, because I think a lot of us just do it. I think a lot of us just see the obligation of it, but I don't know that we've actually internalized how extraordinary of an act that is, because so many people don't. And it is in that exceptional space that you are making this world better. And despite the fact that you are not recognized and rewarded for it, is inconsequential to the fact that it just is an extraordinary thing. And as an extension of that, whether you get the grant or not, that is not the measure of success. Again, none of these structures were set up for you to win. So getting the grant or not getting the grant doesn't really mean anything, right? I think we really measure our success by the impact that we have on our communities and what our community says back to us in terms of the work that we're doing. In terms of just fundraising, because we do it, right? Until we can figure out other systems for sustaining the work, we're still caught up in this hamster wheel of trying to figure out the money. And in this regard, I put on my fundraising hat. And what I know to be true is that relationships are everything. They're key to navigating the fundraising landscape. And that whenever possible, you always want to deal with the decision makers, right? I had someone tell me early in my career, decisions trickle down, not up. So start with the person at top. And it may be, like it may not even be the person that you're thinking it is, but always try to figure out who the decision maker is, who has the authority. I have found in my career that there are policies that can be easily overturned by whomever when they want to overturn them. I have seen grant applications be a mere formality when a strong relationship is in place. So if you do nothing else, right, in the limited time that you have, mine those relationships, dig deep into them, nurture them, continue to nurture them, and they will deliver for you. And then lastly, on the nonprofit side, there have been a lot of articles written recently just sounding the alarm around everyday giving. That everyday giving and that small gifts really are the lifeblood to organizations that a lot of nonprofits, small, mid-sized, and large, whenever thinking about a fundraising program or a development department, they tend to focus on the top 1% of donors. Like everyone's talking about major donors, and not giving as much attention to your everyday smaller givers. And this is where, when we look closely at an organization's roster of giving, like this is where the lifeblood of the organization really exist. And so again, tending to those relationships, what sort of programs can you put in place to help with monthly reoccurring gifts? We can look back at 2008 with the Obama campaign. We elected the first Black president of the United States on $30 donations, right? There are some really compelling case studies out there that really show the power of small, consistent gifts. So I would encourage us to think about strategies that could help and support that. On the donor funding side, right, again, the burden is on y'all, right? The burden really is on you. One, because you have the resources, and two, you have the authority to do what you want with them. right? And so we can do every sort of grant making, program, application writing workshop, get technical assistance in the form of consultants, and come up with all kinds of great plans, do all the things, and still come up short. You merely have to just make a different decision and it's done. And so taking uh, the burden off of us to do something differently when the decision for you is really the change that needs to be made is really easy on your part. I often say that the gap in funding is really a relationship gap. And so I think when funders and donors alike take a bigger interest in this issue and seek out to build these relationships, to learn and discover, I think there's a tremendous opportunity in what can be done in terms of your own grant making and the portfolios that you're putting together. As I mentioned earlier on, start basing organizations on representation, right? Is there a Black woman in charge? If check yes, you're winning. You're making a great decision if there's a Black woman at the helm of the organization. Are these leaders working from a place of lived experience? The impact of lived experience on how it informs the solutions that are being provided for those communities. These need to be crucial questions that you're asking on an application or that you're doing behind the scenes to figure out whether an organization should be supported or not. Of course, we need less process. We need less process and faster decision making and more money. Yes, we need more money. And we know that it can be done because COVID showed us what was possible. We saw folks finding all kinds of creative ways. I saw grants coming through PayPal, right? Through Zelle, through Cash App. It's possible. And you can do it without requiring a lot of requirements like audits and extensive financials, right? We know that that can be done. COVID showed us what's possible. For some reason, we're going back to the same old ways, and we need to keep pressing forward, being innovative at distributing dollars without all the friction so that folks can go about doing the work that needs to be done. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, publicly give Black, but don't name Black. And what I mean by that is that Giving Gap was created. We are having this conversation because there has been this huge gap and disparity in giving to organizations merely because of the racial identity of the organization. And now folks are creating initiatives and creating new funds that they've named Black, which actually doesn't feel good or any better because the call for support was never because we were Black. It was because we do good work that you haven't recognized and rewarded. And so in the same way, you don't have a white fund. Nobody has a white fund. I've never seen a white fund unless it's an organization that's a hate group, right? Working against the ideals of America. There's never been a white fund, but I've seen grant portfolios that have all white organizations as their grantees. And no one would tell me that they're getting those dollars because they're white. They would tell me they're getting those dollars because they deliver great programs, they have exceptional leadership. That's what we're asking for in this moment, is to be rewarded and recognized for the good work that we do, the commitment that we continue to make to our communities, all the ways that we have sacrificed in service to community, and the lived experience that we bring in doing that work. And those are my notes. That's my notes, y'all. By closing funding gaps and fostering equity and justice, we amplify the transformative power of Black nonprofits and pave the way for a future characterized by equality and awareness. In this future, we all thrive. Mic drop.
Thank you so much, Heather. I love that. I thought you were gonna tell us how to support Giving Gap. Like how do we
Of
what yeah.
course, of
Yes,
course. I wanted to pause here if there were any questions, but here's all my contact information.
there are many questions, like what's your contact information? So there you go.
There it is. There it is. Email me.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask some, I feel like the easier sort of technical questions first, and then
Okay.
I'll share my screen. Someone asked, oh goodness, now I have to find it. So if you're, are you collecting the amount of money that these different organizations raise, and is that published somewhere?
That's a great question. It's not a functionality right now of our platform. Right now, if you come on Giving Gap and look up an organization, you'll see what's called an organizational sort of profile as you see on the screen right now, right? It
Mhm.
has the name of the organization, the cause area, their geographic location, a quick little mission blurb about them, and then the two links take them out of our platform directly to the organization's website or to the donation page of the organization's website. So once someone leaves Giving Gap, I mean, we can track that someone's clicked on donate, but what happens after that, we're not able to capture that just yet. That's sort of like a long-term goal. Right now, we've been focusing on creating utility around the user experience that's inspiring and compelling. We're actually in the midst of refreshing our website homepage to do that. And then building out the directory to be more inclusive of many more organizations across the states. So there are some states where we don't have a lot of organizations listed, but tracking funding clearly is an important aspect of what we do. And to be able to quantify what is the actual gap, because we actually don't know. We don't know.
Mm, okay. This so while people are giving you suggestions, Lakeisha says, will there be a networking feature slash function on the Giving Gap platform for the nonprofits to connect nationally?
Yes, that's a great question. We're starting to put some member resources together, but this
Mhm.
question of facilitating some either online or in person has definitely come up. I would love for you, Lakeisha, if you could email me what your thoughts and ideas around that, because we're national. Just how we organize that is a bit daunting. So I welcome any thoughts and ideas that you have, and if you want to partner in any kind of way, that would be great.
Yeah, Lakeisha, because as you're talking, you can see people in the chat like, I'm from here, anybody interested in that? And Candid is also interested in like, how do we get you together? Virtually is probably the answer, but how do we really make something work that feels like networking and feels like community? It's not easy. So yeah, I'd love to get in on that as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. More questions. We have a lot of questions. Uh, S- Salayfield says, I am fairly new, 2.5 years, organization over a lupus foundation, which is a disease that most people don't know anything about. Oh, okay. So
Mm.
obtaining funders has been difficult. What is some advice you can offer? This is your fundraising hat. We have a few of those because you mentioned fundraising. So what do you suggest?
Well, I mean, I think the place is always to start with your own network, right? Knowing that when you're starting something new, that folks are really supporting you, less about the cause and more about their interest in you. So that's oftentimes kind of like where you start when you're developing something new that's never been done before. Lupus, yes, is not a widely recognized or known, but there are different outlets or outposts throughout the country that have been organized around lupus. So identifying um, who's supporting those organizations and um, seeing what their grant making guidelines are, if they're organizations that are national funders, or if they support organizations in your backyard where you're located. You didn't mention where you're located. There's the foundation directory, which is part of Candid, is it not?
Yes, very much.
Um, It's a searchable tool that you can use to identify organizations. It allows you to put in different kinds of criteria. So if it's like health or African Americans, like that sort of thing, you could put in that criteria, and then they can spit out for you a list of organizations that might have an interest. But in those early stages of fundraising for your organization, you're really fundraising for yourself, and so some networking, so attending maybe health related networking events, seminars, organizations. There's always sort of like a sponsor that will be in the room. And like I said, things trickle down, they don't go up. So looking who is the main contact and making those connections. My email is listed on the screen there. So if there are like more specific things that I can help with, feel free to reach out.
Do you know what you're asking for, Heather?
I'm here for the people because the people are here for
You're gonna be
us.
okay. Okay, you say so. I also put in, so someone else mentioned the Health Care Collective. It's somewhere there's a lot going on in the chat. The Health Equity Collective, and
I'll
then
look at
I
that. Yeah.
just put in where you can find us. Foundation directory. We're in
Yes.
many libraries and different resource centers. And so I put a candid.org find us. So we're in all the Atlanta public libraries. As that's a new thing. So yeah, anyway, I put that in the chat. Okay. Carolyn wants to know how can we also build a resource/network for nonprofits seeking committed board leadership and other resources outside of funding? Oh boy.
I'm right there with you all.
Right. Like how can we? We don't
How can we? Yes. How can we?
know.
Yeah. I mean, it's really getting back to basics, right? It's really looking to our communities, right? I think we've always had a tendency, we're always like, I'm in Atlanta, so everyone's always thinking about like, how do we get Tyler Perry to give? How do we get Tyler Perry to be on our board, right? So we always think about like the big names and the celebrities, and we forget about those that are closest to us, like in the communities, working with us. I think this has been the biggest disservice of these Mackenzie Scott announcements and the Melinda French, right? Like all of this focus and spotlight on these big givers, the Robert Smiths, and you know how he supported Morehouse, and that's great and incredible, and we need that. But I think it causes us to only think about that kind of profile when we're thinking about board leadership, when we're thinking about donors, when we're thinking about just supporters overall. The same way that you've been captivated by the cause, there's somebody else for whom this cause resonates with them and really connecting with them. And some of that is just good old fashioned networking, which is what we do, right? I think sometimes when we name these things networking, when we call it fundraising, when we call it philanthropy, it creates this disconnect between what we have an affinity to do naturally and like this other institutionalized thing. But it's no different than when you're at church and you're chatting up something and then you ask someone to support anything. These things, they're part of us, right? It's really just about like how we love up on each other and extending the invitation to someone to love up on other people with you. Who doesn't want to be part of something like that? And so I think like remembering that at the heart of this is the opportunity to make things better and to do that in partnership with one another. That's kind of an irresistible offering.
You're sort of answering the question I was about to ask because you're kind of getting there. Like how do you start doing that intimate fundraising? You know, you mentioned that and it feels good, and that's kind of what you're answering right now. But if I'm new, and maybe I'll throw in I'm an introvert. I don't want to talk to anybody. How would you suggest that I start fundraising, thinking about the community rather than those big donors?
Yeah, I think if getting in front of people is a challenge, then that's something that you'll have to overcome and figure out. And if it is so unbearable, then you're going to have to find someone within your organization who can do that. Someone has to be public facing, talking about the work, right, and connecting. A lot of it starts with just our posturing, right? Like if we believe, right, if this is work that we believe in, right, that we're investing our lives into addressing because it's so important, why would we want to deny someone else the opportunity to be part of that? That's the invitation. And that's a little bit of reframing that I think that we all need to do, right? It's not a hassle to someone when you're giving them an opportunity, when you're sharing with them something that you believe in, right? That's a great thing to be able to share and offer to someone. So I think starting with a sort of an approach and perspective that recognizes the work that I do is valuable and important, and I need to share it with other people so that they can be part of it. One of the biggest byproducts of giving is a sense of belonging. That's part of it, right? I have seen that as fundraisers, we are not only facilitating dollars to an organization, we are brokering relationships. I've seen donors serve on boards who great friends with one another, become great friends with one another, or find opportunities for employment, and that we as an organization, we were at the center of creating that connection. Like, that's what we have to offer. That's why I changed my title from development director at one point to opportunity, because that's really what it is that we are extending to people. It's really a mutually beneficial relationship where, you know, we're talking about this mission work that you get to be part of and meet other people in serving, and then the impact that you have on the beneficiaries, all those good vibes that make you feel good, give you reason to wake up in the morning, make you feel more encouraged about the future and the plight of the world. Like, that cannot be dismissed or undercounted in any kind of way. It's really important. So if you see your work in that way, then I think you'll move differently.
I agree. I feel like I always ask people their why. And when they light up and they're able to talk about it, I'm like, that's what we're talking about. Like, you don't have to feel like this is like rocket science and I'm so nervous to talk about it. This is like your life's work, the reason you wanted to do this. So it should be maybe not easy, but it should flow at a certain point when you realize, like, I created a whole thing around this.
Yeah.
I work here. I'm out here every
Yeah.
day. And boards, I know everyone doesn't have a great board, but hopefully if you have those people that are as passionate and that's why they're on your board, then they can help you as well. So we say that. Uh, a couple of more technical questions about Giving Gap. Someone said, please provide the link to sign up, and I put your website. Is that pretty much
Yep.
how?
There's the
Yeah.
top right hand corner. You'll see on the navigation bar, submit a nonprofit. That's the process.
Okay. And then Dorinda said, once you are on Giving Gap, what is the next step?
Once you're on the platform, like you've been approved and you're posted, the next step is that, on our side, we just continue through our marketing efforts to drive attention. We spotlight different organizations depending on kind of where we are in the given year in terms of like what awareness months are going on. We tend to spotlight recently added organizations. So there are a number of things that we do through social media and through various marketing channels to uplift and highlight. We're getting ready to do next month. Tomorrow is the start of Black Philanthropy Month. And being based in Atlanta, we decided to kick off our efforts here by hosting a reception event in person. Wow. In person, to raise dollars for 4 organizations that we've identified in the Atlanta area. The Higher Foundation, All Abroad, Feeding Georgia Families, and Giwan Mata. All organizations doing incredible work, ranging in budget size from like 40,000 to 200,000. We've raised about 5,000 for each of them, and we're hoping to increase that through our campaign and then through the event.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at these questions like, can you provide a recording? Yes, you'll get a recording. I mentioned that. So I'm just kind of looking at the different questions. We're winding down, and I just want to make sure when you and I talked about doing this webinar, you felt very strongly about us understanding the value of being these Black-led organizations and what is so special about us and why you like to talk about this, these numbers are not just about a gap, but understanding the things that we bring, the positive
Mhm.
things. So I just want to give you another moment to tell us, why being Black-led. When I speak to someone about my Black-led organization, I'm actually on the board of a Black-led organization. What are the things that I should definitely know that have them understand?
Yeah, I think it's everything that we said, what was said, everything that was said earlier about the commitment that we bring. I didn't mention, I think it goes without saying, but because we've operated with, limited resources, we've been incredibly resourceful with that. I can't underscore enough just that unrelenting pursuit of an issue that we bring. I've said many times before that your best bet is on a Black organization. One, because the work will exist with or without you.
Mm,
So um, I would partner with the organization of which I can only help to enhance, right? Because
mm,
I work in collaboration with them. The lived experience piece can underscore that enough. So these, I mean, I hope these become talking points that you all use to challenge these criteria or policies that are put in place that are not in service to your qualification when asking for these grants. I hope we use this when we're looking and scrutinizing what a funder says that they support, particularly if DEI is referenced at any place within an application or on a website. Like, explain to me exactly what that is, right? I remember, following the call up to the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, and like DEI and equity and racial equity, all this stuff was everywhere on the website. And when I asked them how they were evaluating and defining that, they had no response. It had no response. This big old institution with all of these employees, and you can't figure out a response to equity. So we really have to hold them accountable. And, a lot of these institutions really don't know what they're doing in this space. And it really does require us to dictate what needs to happen, but only to the extent that you have time and interest and inclination, because I don't encourage anybody to go around educating anybody. One of the aspects or philosophy of my leadership of Giving Gap is I'm here to work with those that are initiated in this space. I'm not here to explain racism 101. If you don't believe there's a gap, okay, that's fine. Climate change isn't real. I don't know. That's on you. The gap is there. It exists. We've all experienced it. And I'm going to move forward with those that recognize that and want to be in partnership, are asking, how do I help? That's who I want to work with. I'm not here to spend any of my waking hours trying to explain a thing to anybody. And I don't really encourage anybody else to do it. You got to save your sanity, however best you can.
yes, yes, and yes. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited. There's like all this energy in the chat, and there were in the questions as well about somehow getting together and networking. And we're gonna figure something out, Heather. We're pretty smart. And we have people who are gonna email. A lot of people are gonna email you too, so we can
Come
take over.
on with it. Come on with it. I'm
They
here
are
for
all
it.
yeah, so they're all going to email you. You and I will talk about the emails, and then we'll figure out how to make something happen, because I love the energy, and you said a lot that reminds me of, what I'm seeing in the chat, like how can we get together? We're so
Yeah.
collaborative. Like we can't wait to make a community out of something, and figure
Yeah.
out how to fix some things. So I'm excited, and I'm very glad that you were here. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for joining us today. And if you like this webinar, hope we'll see you again, or at least hear you and see your your reactions again. And that's it for today. So I think I'll let you go have your water and go hang out. Hopefully it's not raining in Atlanta today again.
No, it's not.
Um,
Yeah, it's great.
right. It's
Thank you,
looking a little,
everybody.
yes. Thank you. Bye
You are
all.
loved and appreciated, y'all. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.